Johnny Carson welcomed hundreds of stars to his couch, but only a few left behind controversy that Hollywood still whispers about. Before late-night television became loud, chaotic, and scripted, Carson ruled with something far more dangerous: control. Every laugh, every pause, every guest, carefully measured. And if someone crossed the line, even once, they didn't just bomb on television, they disappeared. Because behind that calm smile was a man who never forgot. In rare moments, through interviews and insider accounts, a different story begins to emerge. One where certain guests didn't just have a bad night, they made a mistake they couldn't come back from. These weren't unknown names, they were some of the biggest stars in the world. Comedians, icons, legends, all sitting under the same spotlight, and somehow still managing to lose everything in a single appearance. What made these moments so controversial wasn't just what happened on camera, but what happened after. The quiet bans, the doors that never reopened, the silence that followed. Because in Carson's world, you didn't get a second chance. Today, we're revealing the 8 most controversial guests to ever appear on The Tonight Show, and the moments that got them erased from Johnny Carson's stage. Number 8. Orson Welles. Orson Welles wasn't just another guest walking onto The Tonight Show. He was someone Johnny Carson actually admired. That's what makes this story a little uncomfortable to sit with. Because before things went wrong, Welles wasn't an outsider. He was part of the circle, a regular face, someone Carson respected not just as a filmmaker, but as a performer. There was even a kind of shared language between them, especially when it came to magic. Carson loved it, practiced it, took it seriously. So when Welles said he wanted to do a mentalism act on the show, it didn't feel random. It felt fitting. But from the very beginning, something was off. Carson, who understood how these tricks worked, watched closely. Not like a host enjoying a segment, but like someone trying to figure out what was happening underneath it. And then the trick started to fall apart. Not dramatically, not in a way that would shock a casual viewer, but enough. Enough for Carson to notice. The act relied on audience interaction, people supposedly chosen at random, reacting in real time. Except they weren't random. Welles had quietly placed 2 men in the audience to help control the outcome. That alone wasn't unusual in the world of stage magic. But what mattered was this: the illusion only works if everything goes exactly right. And this time, it didn't. The planted participants made mistakes. Timing slipped. Responses didn't land the way they were supposed to. The illusion cracked, just slightly, but enough for someone like Carson to see through it. At that point, the failure itself wasn't the real issue, because in show business, things fail all the time. What changed everything was what Carson learned after. He found out the act was built on deception that hadn't been acknowledged. Welles hadn't framed it as illusion or performance. He had presented it in a way that blurred the line between entertainment and something more real. And for Carson, that line mattered. He wasn't angry that the trick didn't land. He was angry that it wasn't honest about what it was. As one account puts it, Carson wasn't irate because the trick flopped. He was furious about the dishonesty behind it. That reaction makes more sense when you understand Carson a little better. He had a deep respect for magic, but only when it played fair with the audience. He disliked performers who leaned too far into pretending something supernatural was happening. In his mind, that crossed from entertainment into manipulation. So for him, it felt like a betrayal of the craft. And maybe, on a more personal level, a betrayal of trust. Because this wasn't some unknown guest trying to impress him. This was Orson Welles, someone he had looked up to. After that night, things quietly shifted. There was no public fallout, no dramatic confrontation, no headlines calling it a feud. just something much colder. Welles simply stopped appearing on the show when Carson was hosting. No invitations, no return. And that silence said everything. In most cases, a failed performance could be forgotten, recovered from, even laughed about later. Number 7. Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis, he was practically part of the furniture in The Tonight Show. By the mid-1970s, he had appeared on the show more than 80 times, not just as a guest, but often as a guest host too. That kind of access doesn't come easily. It means trust. It means comfort. It means you're one of the few people the host actually relies on to carry the show. And for a long time, Lewis was exactly that. But something shifted during one particular week in 1975. Lewis had stepped in to guest host the show again, something he had done many times before. On the surface, everything looked normal. Same stage, same rhythm, same fast-talking, unpredictable energy he was known for. But behind the scenes, things weren't running as smoothly as they appeared. Late-night television is a controlled environment. Every line, every cue, every pause, it all depends on timing. And one of the most important people in that system isn't even on camera: the cue card handler. In this case, that was a man named Don Schiff. His job was simple in theory, stressful in reality. Keep up with the host, deliver lines at the right moment, and adjust instantly when things go off script. And with someone like Jerry Lewis, things always went off script. At some point during that week, Lewis made a request, something last minute, something that needed to be done immediately. Schiff couldn't deliver it in time, and that's where things turned. It escalated. Schiff later told Carson that Lewis became hysterical and verbally abusive when told the request couldn't be fulfilled. Now, moments like that don't usually make it to the audience. They stay backstage. They get absorbed into the chaos of production and disappear. But this one didn't. Because Schiff didn't just brush it off and move on. He went directly to Johnny Carson and made something very clear. He didn't want to work with Lewis again. That alone says a lot. Crew members rarely draw lines like that unless something has really crossed into uncomfortable territory. And Carson, more than anything, listened to his crew. That's the part people often misunderstand about him. On screen, he was relaxed, easygoing, almost detached. But off camera, he had very specific rules. You could challenge him, you could even bomb on his show, but you couldn't disrespect the people who worked behind the scenes. Once Carson heard what happened, the decision came quickly. There was no drawn-out discussion, no attempt to smooth things over. Despite Lewis being one of the biggest names in entertainment, Carson made it clear he wouldn't be invited back. And that's what makes this story feel so final. Because this wasn't about ratings. It wasn't about whether Lewis was funny enough or famous enough. He had already proven both, dozens of times. It came down to something much smaller and much more personal. Respect. As one account of Carson's approach put it, he simply didn't tolerate bad behavior toward his staff, no matter who you were, even if you were Jerry Lewis. After that, his presence on the show faded almost completely. Apart from one brief exception, he never returned in the same way again. Number 6. Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was the kind of guest every late-night host hopes for. He was smart, calm, and surprisingly entertaining. Not in a loud, attention-grabbing way, but in a way that made you lean in and listen. When he spoke about space, it didn't feel like a lecture, it felt like a story. And on The Tonight Show, that worked beautifully. Over the years, Sagan appeared again and again. More than 20 times, in fact. He became part of the show's rhythm. There was even a genuine sense of comfort between him and Johnny Carson. They shared a curiosity about science, especially astronomy, which made their conversations feel natural instead of forced. That's why what happened next feels so unexpected. It wasn't a big argument. There was no shouting, no visible tension. If you watched the episode casually, you might not even notice anything unusual. The moment came in 1986, during a discussion about Halley's Comet, the famous comet that had returned that year after decades. It was a perfect topic for both of them. Carson, who had a real interest in astronomy, was engaged. Sagan, of course, was in his element. Somewhere in that conversation, Carson made a small mistake. Not a huge one, just the kind of slip anyone might make when talking about something complex on live television. And Sagan corrected him. Once, then again. That's it. 2 corrections. No harsh tone. No intention to embarrass. Just a scientist doing what scientists do, being precise. But live television doesn't always process things that simply. Carson smiled through it, kept the conversation moving, even made light of it in the moment, the way a seasoned host does when something slightly awkward happens. To the audience, everything looked fine. Behind that smile, though, something shifted. Carson felt quietly embarrassed, not humiliated, not angry in an explosive way, but stung. The kind of feeling that lingers after the cameras stop rolling. And that's what makes this story so interesting, because nothing about it feels dramatic enough to cause a fallout. There was no insult, no betrayal, no obvious conflict, just a moment, a small one. But on a show like The Tonight Show, small moments could carry weight. Carson was controlling the tone, the rhythm, the atmosphere. Being corrected on air, especially twice, disrupted that balance in a way that didn't sit right with him. What's surprising is that this didn't erase his respect for Sagan. By all accounts, Carson still admired him, still valued his intelligence, still recognized what he brought to the show. And yet, despite that respect, the invitations stopped. Not loudly, not officially, just quietly. Sagan, who had once been one of the show's most frequent and welcome guests, simply wasn't called back again after that appearance. No explanation, no public statement, no closure. Just absence. And maybe that's what makes this one feel different from the others. Because it wasn't built on bad behavior or conflict behind the scenes. It came down to something much more subtle. Timing, perception, and the delicate balance of live television. A brief exchange, a couple of corrections, a passing moment that most people would forget. But for Carson, it was enough. Number 5, Dana Carvey. When Dana Carvey first started appearing on The Tonight Show, things were going really well. He was already gaining attention for his sharp impressions and unpredictable humor. And when he showed up on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, Carson seemed to enjoy having him around. In fact, for a while, their relationship felt surprisingly positive. Carvey would appear on the show, make people laugh, and even poke a little fun at Carson's style. But at that point, it felt harmless, almost like a tribute. According to Carvey himself, Carson initially took those impressions well, and even featured them during anniversary specials. So, what changed? The turning point didn't happen on Carson's stage. It happened on a completely different one, Saturday Night Live. By the late 1980s, Carvey had become one of SNL's standout performers. His impressions were everywhere, and one of his recurring bits was Johnny Carson. But instead of just mimicking his voice or mannerisms, Carvey's version started leaning into something sharper. He exaggerated Carson's pauses, his expressions, his rhythm. And slowly, the impression stopped feeling like admiration and started feeling like commentary. Behind the scenes, Carson wasn't entirely comfortable with it. According to a Tonight Show producer, Carson complained that the impression didn't reflect how he actually spoke. He reportedly said, "I don't talk like that. I don't use those expressions. and felt the portrayal made him look older and slightly confused. Still, he let it slide for a while. Carvey kept getting invited back. The jokes continued. The tension didn't explode. It just sat there, building quietly. Then came one specific sketch in 1990. In it, Carvey played Carson in a way that went further than before. The character came across as out of touch, unhip, and clueless, especially when placed next to newer, more energetic figures in late-night television. And that's the part that hit differently. Because by that time, the late-night landscape was already shifting. New hosts were coming in with a different style, a different energy, and suddenly, this sketch felt like a statement, almost like a suggestion that Carson's time was passing. Carson saw it, and this time, he didn't brush it off. That sketch became the breaking point. Shortly after it aired, Carvey was permanently banned from appearing on The Tonight Show. What makes this moment interesting is how subtle it looks from the outside. There was no public feud, no angry interview, no direct confrontation between the two. Carson even made a quiet joke about it in his monologue days later, hinting at aging without directly mentioning Carvey or the sketch. But behind that joke was a decision that didn't change, and Carvey felt it. Years later, he admitted that one particular sketch, one he didn't even fully support at the time, was likely the reason he never returned. That's what makes this story land a little differently than the others. There was no backstage fight, no disrespect towards staff, no clear incident you could point to, just a performance. A joke that crossed from funny into something a little too real. Because in comedy, timing matters, but so does perception. And in Carson's world, if a joke made him look like he was losing his edge, especially in front of millions of viewers, that wasn't something he was willing to laugh off. So the invitations stopped. Quietly, permanently. Number 4. Joan Rivers. She first appeared in 1965, and almost overnight, everything changed for her. Johnny Carson saw something in her that others hadn't fully recognized yet. He didn't just invite her back, he kept bringing her on, again and again, until she became one of the most frequent and trusted faces on the show. Over time, their dynamic became something deeper than host and guest. Carson mentored her, backed her, even gave her the kind of exposure that comedians spend years chasing. Rivers herself later admitted that he was the one who handed her career at a time when she was still trying to find her place. And in return, she stayed loyal for nearly 2 decades. While other comedians moved on to do their own shows, Rivers remained closely tied to Carson's world. She guest hosted regularly, sat in his chair, became, in many ways, a natural extension of The Tonight Show itself. Which is why what happened next didn't feel like a career move. It felt like something else entirely. In the mid-1980s, Rivers was offered something huge: her own late-night show on Fox. On paper, it was a breakthrough moment. A woman leading her own show in a space dominated by men. It should have been a celebration. But there was one detail that changed everything. She didn't tell Carson. At least, not in the way he expected. Instead of hearing it directly from her early on, Carson found out through industry channels before she had a proper conversation with him. To him, it was personal. Because in his mind, this wasn't just about business. This was about loyalty. Carson felt sucker punched by the situation, as if someone he had supported for years had gone behind his back. And it didn't stop there. In the weeks leading up to the announcement, Rivers had still been in talks with NBC and The Tonight Show, giving the impression she would continue appearing or guest hosting. That only made the situation feel worse when the truth came out. From Carson's perspective, it looked like she had already made her move, without ever being honest about it. And once that trust broke, there was no fixing it. What makes this fallout so striking is how final it was. But behind that calm response was a decision that never changed. He cut her off completely. They never spoke again. Not once. For more than 2 decades, Rivers stayed away from The Tonight Show. Not because she didn't want to return, but because the door had been closed. And for someone who had once been such a central part of that stage, the silence felt heavy. Rivers went on to rebuild her career in other ways. She found success again, won awards, stayed relevant. But that relationship with Carson never healed. Looking back, even she struggled to fully understand it. She suggested that maybe he felt possessive of the role he had played in her rise, or that the break simply cut deeper than either of them expected. But whatever the reason, the outcome stayed the same. This wasn't about a bad joke or a tense moment backstage. This was about trust. And once that was broken, even someone as important as Joan Rivers couldn't find her way back to that couch again. Number 3. Steve Allen. Steve Allen holds a strange place in the history of The Tonight Show. Long before Johnny Carson became the king of late-night television, Allen was the man who started it all. When The Tonight Show first premiered in 1954, Allen was the original host. His relaxed style, spontaneous humor, and willingness to play around with guests helped create the blueprint for what late-night talk shows would eventually become. Carson knew that history well. In fact, he openly credited Allen for paving the way. Over the years, Carson invited Allen back many times, sometimes as a guest, sometimes even as a guest host when Carson was away. Allen appeared on the program more than 60 times in different roles, which shows that the relationship between the two men was initially respectful and friendly. But the strange thing about their story is that the fallout between them didn't begin with some massive scandal. It started with something much smaller. In 1982, Allen returned once again to guest host the show. On stage, everything looked normal enough. The jokes landed, the audience laughed, and the show moved along the way it always did. At one point during that appearance, Allen made a light joke about Carson missing an earlier show because of an exercise accident. To many viewers, it probably sounded harmless, just another late-night jab between comedians. But according to later accounts, that comment didn't sit well with Carson, who had previously been injured. Still, that joke alone probably wouldn't have ended their relationship. What really pushed things over the edge happened backstage. During the same guest hosting stint, Allen's associates reportedly asked the show's production crew to make several last-minute changes to his segment. The crew tried to adjust as best they could, but when something didn't go the way Allen expected, the situation escalated. Allen became angry about the confusion and ended up yelling at a crew member who had simply been following instructions, and the tension didn't stop there. The next day, Allen reportedly called the same crew member and continued scolding them over the changes that had been made to his act. The worker, understandably upset, eventually went to Carson and asked for something very simple. They didn't want to work with Allen again. That request mattered. Carson had a reputation for protecting his staff. He could tolerate a bad performance or a joke that didn't land. But disrespect toward the people who worked behind the scenes was something he rarely ignored. When Carson heard what had happened, the decision came quickly. He told the crew member they wouldn't have to worry about it anymore, because Allen would no longer be invited back while Carson was hosting. And just like that, the original host of The Tonight Show found himself banned from the program he had helped create. What makes the story even more unusual is that Allen did technically return to the show years later, but only when Carson wasn't there. During the late 1980s, Allen appeared on episodes hosted by guest hosts like Jay Leno and Patrick Duffy. In other words, the door wasn't completely closed, but it was closed to Carson. And that detail says a lot about how seriously he took loyalty and respect behind the scenes, because in Carson's world, fame didn't grant immunity. Even the man who invented the format of the show wasn't exempt from the rules. And once Carson believed those rules had been broken, the history between them didn't matter anymore. Number 2. Ellen DeGeneres. Ellen DeGeneres didn't arrive on The Tonight Show with attitude. She arrived with nerves. At that stage in her career, getting a spot with Johnny Carson was the moment. Comics waited years for it. Some never got it at all. And when Ellen finally stepped onto that stage in 1986, she delivered the kind of set that made people sit up and pay attention. Carson did something rare that night. He called her over to the couch. That small gesture meant everything. It told the audience, the industry, and every executive watching at home that she mattered. Almost overnight, Ellen went from up and coming to someone people needed to keep an eye on. So when she came back for later appearances, there was already momentum behind her. But momentum also brings pressure. By her third visit, she was trying to prove she belonged. And somewhere in that process, things got complicated. Before going on stage, Ellen was reportedly given a note about her set. Not a full rewrite, not a major restriction, just a specific adjustment. A joke that needed to be removed or changed. This wasn't unusual. Late-night shows are tightly controlled environments. Timing, tone, even wording can be shaped before a comedian steps into the spotlight. Ellen listened. And then, when it was time to perform, she didn't follow it. She went ahead with the material the way she had planned it. From the audience's point of view, nothing felt off. The laughs were there. The delivery worked. It didn't look like a mistake. It looked like confidence. Backstage, though, it landed differently. A producer confronted her after the set, pointing out that she had ignored a direct instruction. It wasn't framed as creative freedom. It was seen as stepping out of line. And that distinction mattered. Because Carson's show wasn't built on improvisation alone. It was built on trust. If something was agreed upon beforehand, it was expected to stay that way once the cameras rolled. Ellen's decision, intentional or instinctive, broke that expectation. What's interesting is how quiet everything stayed after that. There was no public criticism, no awkward moment on air. Carson didn't call it out in a monologue or make it into a joke. From the outside, her appearance looked completely normal. But behind the scenes, a line had been crossed. And from that point on, her invitations stopped. Not dramatically, not officially, just no more calls. She didn't return to The Tonight Show during Carson's time as host. Years later, she would appear again, but only when someone else was sitting in that chair. Looking back, the whole situation feels almost too small to carry that kind of consequence. One joke, one decision, but that's what makes it stand out. Number 1. Jay Leno. It's almost hard to believe now, but there was a time when Jay Leno couldn't get back on The Tonight Show. Not because he wasn't funny, not because he wasn't famous, but because at one point, Johnny Carson simply decided he didn't want him there. Leno's first appearance in 1977 actually went very well. So well, in fact, that Carson did something rare. He publicly praised him and even told the audience they'd be seeing him again. That kind of approval wasn't handed out lightly. For a young comedian, it was a signal that things were about to change. And they did. Leno came back. Then again, and again. Within a short time, he was becoming a regular presence, the kind of performer who felt like he was slowly earning a place in Carson's world. Then came one night that shifted everything. It was his 5th appearance. On paper, nothing about it looked dramatic. No scandal, no argument, no behind-the-scenes chaos. Just a stand-up set in front of a live audience. But something didn't connect. The jokes landed quietly. The laughter was there, but it was thin, scattered. Not the kind of reaction that fills a room or carries momentum. And on a show like this, that difference is impossible to ignore. Carson noticed, and more importantly, he made a decision based on it. The reaction that night was enough for Carson to lose confidence in Leno's act. The audience response had been so weak that he decided not to invite him back again. That was it. No second attempt to fix things. No gradual fade out. Just a stop. Behind the scenes, some people didn't agree with that call. Talent scout Jim McCauley reportedly tried to argue in Leno's favor, believing he still had potential. But Carson had already made up his mind. And when Carson made up his mind, it usually didn't change. As one producer bluntly put it at the time, Johnny just doesn't like him. He doesn't like his jokes. That line says more than it sounds like, because this wasn't about one bad night. It was about how Carson saw you after that night. For Leno, the door closed. Quietly, but firmly. For years, he stayed away from the show that had once looked like his big break, and in the world of late-night television back then, that distance mattered. Not being invited back meant something. But here's where the story takes a turn no one could have predicted. Leno didn't disappear. Instead, he kept working, kept performing, kept refining his material in other spaces, in front of different audiences. Over time, his reputation started to grow again, this time without Carson's backing. And eventually, the same show that had shut him out reconsidered. Nearly a decade later, in the mid-1980s, Leno was invited back, not just as a guest, but as a recurring presence, and eventually even as a guest host. The comeback wasn't loud. It didn't come with an apology or explanation. It just happened. And that quiet return led to something much bigger. Because a few years later, when Carson stepped away from The Tonight Show in 1992, it was Jay Leno who took his place, going on to host the show for more than 2 decades. Some moments made careers, others ended them. Just like that. Which one surprised you the most? Let us know below, and don't forget to subscribe for more.